Welcome back to SledgeHammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Today, I am joined by the director of the new film Bloodborne, Reed Shusterman. Reed, how you doing today, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Oh no, this is totally awesome. I was able to watch Bloodborne. Obviously, we're going to talk about this a little bit, guys. This is spoiler free. Just some of the things about the movie that I think you should be checking out. I will tell you this: I was emotionally devastated 7 minutes into the movie. At the 7 minute mark, I was emotionally devastated already. So you definitely know how to start a movie, man. Before we get into anything about the film, though,
Thank you.
What was it like being on set with this film? So obviously, just a little bit. What this is a man and woman are trying to get pregnant. They find a way to do so, and we go from there. But what was it? This is a very emotional, as a horror movie, as a thriller movie, as a suspense movie. But this is also a family drama. There's a lot of love and there's a lot of anxiety to this movie. What was it like being on set for this?
Well, first of all, it was fantastic. It's my first feature that I directed. So that was fantastic on just getting to do this level. But on a story level and connecting with the story, this is a movie that came from, they say write what you're scared of when you're writing a horror movie. And my wife and I were talking about having a kid. And naturally, that scared the shit out of me. So I wrote a movie about it. And this got greenlit, I think, about August 14th, 2019. And about a week later, my wife told me that we were going to have a baby. So this shot in November of that year. And so my wife was ramping up into pregnancy. She was on set for a lot of the movie and, watched. So it was a really interesting way to sort of externalize my own anxieties that I was really feeling and really make them not about me and about the work and about what I was doing. So I think part of why it works emotionally is because I was able to really tie into that. And I really felt it in a way that, I don't think everybody's always feeling their horror movies.
So was there ever a point when your wife was like, well, I'm not going to name him Reed Jr.?
No, that was never never something I wanted. Never something I wanted. Lord forbid somebody else have to deal with growing up being told, "Oh, you read books," and then becoming a writer doesn't. People don't stop that later.
So, one thing that I want to say about this interview, I'm hoping that this interview can turn into our carved stone dick. So, part of this movie is there is also, like I was saying, you have the horror, you have the suspense, you have the family drama, but there's also like a mythical, almost sci-fi feeling to this movie. And when you guys watch it, the our carved stone dick thing will make more sense to you. But also there's something that non-spoiler, but obviously when a woman gets pregnant and she goes through 9 months of pregnancy, her body goes through changes. Mm-hmm. Now, watching these changes take effect throughout this movie, especially with her stomach, is fucking amazing. I love what you guys did with that. And I thought that it was absolutely mind-blowing how you guys did that. A lot of the effects in this are practical. Is that something that you wanted, was more practical effects?
Yeah, for one, getting a good practical effect is a lot cheaper than getting a good computer generated effect. There is some CGI stuff in there. There's probably more than it looks like because a lot of it was really well done. But it's more visceral, especially when you're dealing with blood and stuff. It's more visceral when you can see the blood dripping down on stuff. I know when we were doing a couple of our draft posters for the movie, there were some things where, we would try one stock footage and try putting blood on there, and just making blood look good in a still image when it's not real is really hard. So when you're dealing with blood and dealing with gross things, you really want to see it and feel it. And also, I think that's just part of the appeal of horror movies for me, is if you're gonna do something, I really want to. I'm not a huge fan of gore in general. Like, I'll cover my eyes and have my wife tell me when it's over. But if you're gonna do it, it can't look silly. It has to feel gross. You don't want somebody like me being able to watch it and laughing at how silly it looks. So that was important when we were doing the movie, that those moments, which, there are a couple of them that they really felt visceral and uncomfortable and really make you cringe a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's definitely a couple of those moments that make you cringe, and but I think that really adds to what I wanted to talk about next. Before we get to the reason why you're here, this has a great twist in the third act, and that whole third act to me, it's a blast all around. The third act, essentially, I don't want to say it because I don't want to spoil anything, but when you get to that third act, it almost feels like you're getting punched in your gut because this is not the way that you saw this going down. What was it like to, as a writer and as a director, be able to write that twist? Because you almost have a change of heart from the beginning of the film, like almost a switcheroo. And, going through that process, you watch this process unfold. The storytelling is great. Great job, by the way, on that. Because you watch this process and you continually watch the changing of the guard, and you don't really understand what's truly happening and how truly effective that is becoming until you get to that third act and you see the big reveal. So as a writer, what was it like to be able to kind of tell the story of watching this twist happen right in front of your face?
That was a big part of the sort of what made the movie work. The first couple of drafts of it had a similar arc, but with the characters reversed. And who started where and how they ended up, and it never quite felt right. And so making that change, which I think I had submitted a draft to my producer, and we all knew something wasn't quite working, and somebody had the idea, well, what if we just switch their points of view? What if we just made these characters not be the other person? And that really unlocked the whole movie, and that really it gives you something to drive to. It's not just like one person slowly going from point A to like point B. It's going from A to Z and Z to A, and that really, because it's a small movie, it's almost all in one location, not entirely, but very close. So you have to feel motion, you have to feel the movement that you're not getting from different locations and stuff. And so the bigger the character arc, that really activated the story and really gave it drives the story forward. Means every scene something's changing and something's happening.
And it's funny because with this movie, like you said, with a small location, these are characters that you fall in love with because of their personality. They're not just your bland, they have personality. They make jokes. They smoke weed. They have fun. They do what they do. But you also empathize with these people. Starting, like I said, at the beginning of the movie, you have a feeling of empathy towards them, and you're rooting for them. You are rooting for something to happen to make this work. And about the middle of the second act to the end of the second act, when you're getting the build, when you do switch location and you start getting the build, like something's not right, and you're just waiting to see the image that you're gonna see eventually.
Exactly.
And then when you finally do see it, you're like, oh my gosh, she did it. Like, wow. So great job, man. I truly enjoyed this film. It was an honor for me to be able to watch it. I think really you guys will enjoy it. I'll have some links down here to where you'll be able to check it out. So make sure you're clicking the links down here in the description. Check the movie out, because I promise you it's a fun ride. You're going to have a good time. It's got a really good twist to it. This is not something that is forced. This is something that you feel is a natural thing that happens with the twist. This isn't something that was overthought, overwritten. It's just almost like this is the natural cycle of how it would go. So it's something I very much enjoyed. So Reed, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to pick your brain a little bit. I really appreciate it.
Of course. I'm really glad you liked it. It means a lot.
Yeah. No problem, man. Now, I do want to get into the reason why we are here, my friend.
Of course.
We talked about Bloodborne, which is something that I think we both, obviously, you enjoy. Yeah. I enjoyed it very much too, and I hope you guys do as well. But now, my friend, I want to go back to the past, and I want to talk about what got you started in the horror genre. The first horror movie you watched, and your first horror movie was
Final Destination, the original, the first one in theaters, starring Devon Sawa. And just just a bunch of really hardcore 90s actors. Ali Larter's
in there.
Yeah. Just
Sean William Scott.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. I always forget how every time I watch it, it just, oh yeah, they're in it. It just got that great energy.
It does, man. And I recently did a franchise ranking of the Final Destination franchise. And this is one of those franchises to me that 1 and 2 are amazing. 3 and 4, not so much, but then they brought it back with 5. 5 fucking blew me away, man. So, do you remember how old you were the first time you had seen Final Destination?
It was in theaters, and I was maybe 10 or so. Whenever it came out, that I saw it in theaters. My mom, it was rated R, I believe, and my mom was convinced to take me and my buddy Sam to the theaters, and we loved it. My mom spent the entire time just gripping my wrist and cutting off circulation, except the one time I went to the bathroom and I came back and my mom had reached across the empty seat, was holding my good friend's hand while I was gone.
That's so awesome.
She later apologized for, but he thought it was funny.
If I was him, the whole ride home, I'd have been like, so the wedding's next week.
Yeah.
We're in love now. It's official. So, again, Final Destination is a movie, like you said, it has a great cast to it. Something I think is underrated in the Final Destination franchise in general is the score. There's a great score to this film. Now, with the score comes a lot of the horror elements that come with this movie. So what scene would you say, Reed, was the scene that affected you the most from Final Destination?
I think weirdly it's one without a score. I think it's the one where I forget her name, but they're standing on the sidewalk and they're having an argument, and this girl, she turns to her friends and says something about, if you don't like that, you can just drop fucking dead, and then takes a step off the sidewalk, and that bus just comes out of nowhere, and they just sit. I rewatched a couple of the deaths, all the death scenes from most of the movies yesterday, and they just sit on that silence for a good minute, and it's so jarring. It's not it's funny. It's probably the funniest death in the whole thing, but the horror in it, despite the fact that it's so surprising you laugh, but it's also terrifying, and it's so sudden it puts you completely off guard for the rest of the movie, because there's never anything safe. There hadn't been the hints of the deaths that you kind of expect from that kind of franchise. It's just totally out of nowhere, and it says to you, like, this is on. Anything can happen. Anyone can die in any scene.
And I think another thing that I want to put out there about that death, I think people often forget how because now we've all seen it so many times, and we know it's coming, but the first time you see it, like, I remember being like, oh, like, you did not, it was not, no. It wasn't an inevitability that was going to happen. And just all of a sudden, boom.
I think that was one of the first times, because that kind of scene happens a lot now, and I don't think that was common before that movie. That scene just out of nowhere, and that's the one. Whenever I think back about the movie, that's the one thing that sticks with me about that film, is just the bus coming out and sitting there and like, do I laugh because that was horrible? But and that feeling always stuck with me.
And it's one of those scenes where in a movie full of crazy deaths, like you said, this is almost the funny one, but at the same time, it's like you were never really rooting for her or her boyfriend.
No,
because they were both douchey in their own way, but you never want to see anybody die. So I probably know the answer to this, but I gotta ask you, when you think of Final Destination, what is the first thing that pops into your head?
Well, the big opening scenes, the accidents, and really when specifically it's the logs from the second one that were in the trailer that played for about a year and a half. That's the first thing that pops into my head. But it's those big opening death scenes. That's what really gets into my brain.
Yeah, and for those of you if you haven't seen it, or it's been a while since you've seen it, in Final Destination, it's the opening plane. When the plane's exploding, and then Devon Sawa wakes up and the seatbelt breaks and he realizes some shit's about to go down. So it all starts there. In this movie, we talked about which scene affected you the most. This is another one that's hard for me when I think of Final Destination, because this is a movie that I've watched repeatedly. I've watched this probably more than 10 times. It's a movie that I like. It's one of my guilty pleasures. I enjoy it very much. What would you say your favorite scene from Final Destination is?
That's a great question. I thought I might have to answer that, so I've been really thinking about it. And there are two. There's the scene where the teacher is killed with the knife and the fire. And that's just, I think, in the first one at least, before the first one, the second and third one in particular, the scale got really, really big. And some of the deaths sort of went from scary but complicated but scary to just funny and cartoonish. But in the first movie, the teacher's death is sort of the most cartoonish of the deaths, but it's so well shot and well done. And again, I think you're right about the score in that scene. The score makes it scary and it keeps you on edge, and it's almost funny because you're like, oh, that's how she's going to die. Oh no, that's how she's going to die. And it goes on for probably not 5 minutes, but 3 minutes before the stuff actually starts happening.
Yeah.
It's either that one or the one where Sean William Scott gets his head cut off from the train going by, which again, that's another one where you think something's going to happen, you think it's going to happen, you think it's going to happen, and then something comes in and totally sweeps the rug out from under you.
And another thing I want to bring up about Final Destination that I don't think gets talked about enough, to me, the Final Destination franchise is literally a slasher where you don't have a slasher. You know,
exactly.
Like death is your slasher, but you never see him. You see the wind, you see, like the water coming, you always see different things, but you never see your killer. So that to me is more of the brilliance of Final Destination is it's the slasher without a slasher, man. And I think that's so brilliant for them to put into film.
Something I really found interesting when I went back, and I was working on a different feature recently and decided that Final Destination was something I should go back and study. Something that struck me when I was watching it was the first death in Final Destination. After the big plane crash scene is diverted, but it's a kid in his bathroom and you see the water sort of seep out from under the toilet, and then he steps away and the water creeps back, which implies a level of sentience or whatever to the death. And it's not a thing they ever do again in any of the movies, as far as I know, where they show like the specific, where they show something impossible retreating. But the fact that they do that, it gives that edge. It makes you think, oh, there's a conscious thing going after them. And I think you're right. It is a slasher movie. It really is. And I think that little hint where you see the water suck back into the toilet before it tries again, I think that's why it works, because it doesn't see you. It tells you this isn't coincidence. This is on purpose. And
right.
It's before the characters have put it together.
Right. And that's another great thing about this movie is they don't need to put it in your face.
Yes.
You have subtle little moments like that. And that one little moment lets you know for the rest of the franchise, I'm doing this. You don't have to see me, but I'm doing it. And I think that's awesome.
The characters in that movie, as cheesy as it is and as, 90s two-dimensional as they are, there's a lot of character work in that movie, which a lot of horror movies are more character drama than people really think of when you remember them. But there's just so much, like, they go back to school afterwards and they're dealing with the stigma of that. And it gets textured in a way that those kind of movies don't always get. And certainly 3 and 4 in the franchise failed at. But for me, it's the combination of like the deaths that are coming and the slasher feeling in the movie with that sort of really grounded stuff that, as cheesy as it is, works just well enough that it's a great movie.
Something you just said that you hit on, people think of slashers, they think of horror movies, and they don't really consider how important character development is, because if I don't give a shit about these characters, I don't care if they die.
Exactly.
I don't care. So you have to give me something to like, respect, admire about these characters, or the movie's not going to work because I don't care the whole way through. I don't want to watch A Nightmare on Elm Street and root for Freddy the whole time. That doesn't work for me. I want to be able to root for the good guy. That's the whole reason I'm here, is to watch good defeat evil. And that's the brilliant thing about, like you said, the character development in this. We all got so heartbroken when we found out that Devon Sawa was killed by a falling brick in between 1 and 2. The worst off-screen death of all time. So that's how invested we were in that character.
Yeah. The thing that always gets me, I forget the actor and the character's name, but the douchebag in the movie, he's such a two-dimensional douchebag. But even in the scenes where he's being a douchebag, it's partly the performance, it's partly the writing, it's partly the directing, but there's just enough texture. He's just realistic enough. When he's pulled off the plane, he's just upset enough in a way that, he'd be upset in real life, that even though he's a dick all the way up through the end of the movie, up through the very last frame of the movie, he's being a dick. But you still care about him, even though he's the one who you should be rooting to die, and you don't
Yeah.
want him to die because he's scared the way everybody else is. And I think that's a big part of the movie that works is everybody is scared in a really visceral way.
It's not Billy. Billy is Sean Williams. I'm gonna have to
Yeah.
think of that. That's gonna bother me what his name is because Sean Williams, Scott was always calling him Dick. So that's what I think
Yeah.
when I think of like Dick. So now a movie that we've talked about a lot of the kills already, but when we go into a horror movie, obviously the kills is something we as fans we always look forward to in a horror movie. Which kill would you say was your favorite from Final Destination?
From the first one, it's gotta be the night the well, it's either the knife for the teacher or the bus scene. The bus works as a scene, but I think the kill for the when the teacher dies, that's where that's the best structured. Just like, oh, is this going to be it? Is this going to be it? There are 15 different things in that scene where you think that's how she's going to die, and then it's something else, and then Devon Sawa arrives, and it just turns into this ridiculous scene. And I think it's a great scene that is horrible, but is also kind of cheesy. But it doesn't feel cheesy until you're looking back at it later and talking about it. But it just, in the moment, it just works and it feels great. And it propels the whole second half of the movie forward in a way that feels earned.
I was so waiting for you to be like, Devon Sawa's off-screen brick kill. So I got a couple more questions for you before we go. Whenever we talk about a franchise, as we are with Final Destination, your favorite or your first one was Final Destination, but is that your favorite one in the franchise?
It is. I don't think it's. I think 2 is really for me. I think 2 is better. Certainly the big opening scene with the trucks falling off the truck, the logs falling off the truck. I still get nervous to this day driving behind one of those trucks filled with logs because of that trailer, really, that I saw 100 times. And it just you can see the budget got bumped up, and everybody still really cared in a way that they did not care in 3 and 4.
Right.
But 1 just it hits that sweet spot for me, and it has Ali Larter and Sean William Scott and just these actors that I love going back and just seeing like, oh, that's what they were like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I think it's always going to be that one for me.
Right. Yeah. And see, for me, it's a little flipped of what you just said. I think 1 is the best, but I think my favorite is part 2. Like I love part 2. Every part of that movie. I like how in part 2 they try to find a way to defeat death.
Yes.
Like I just think part 2 for me is just my favorite. But we talked about your first horror movie, Reed, and we talked about what that movie meant to you. But now I'm going to go scream on you here for a second. What's your favorite scary movie? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
28 Days Later. No question.
Nice,
28
man.
Days Later. Another one that I saw in theaters, and that was the first instance of fast zombies. First big budget one. There might have been some lower budget things in the 90s, but that was where fast zombies became a thing. And Danny Boyle is just one of those directors that, I mean, this is not a horror movie, but he made that Beatles movie a year or 2 ago, and it's just it's very happy and bubbly, but it's just camera work is electric. And so do that 20 years earlier on a low budget when he's young and hungry on this really intense movie, this story that just it's gripping. That one just that's still if you ask me what my favorite movie is, that's going to be the answer 30% of the time or more.
And I think 28 Days Later has one of the most heartbreaking deaths ever when the dad gets the blood drop in the eye.
That is exactly what I was thinking of. That I hadn't seen it for a couple years and decided to put it on a couple weeks ago. And before I put it on, that I was just like, I remember that Brendan Gleeson and the drop falling into his eye and how sad that was. And I'd forgotten the whole scene. And but I remembered the feeling. It just, because it comes right after the sequence where they drive through the tunnel, which is this really intense, like one of the scariest sequences in any movie I've ever seen. And then, you're catching your breath and you're catching your breath. And then it's not a horror death. It's a drama death. It's sad. It
And
breaks
it's
your
like you
fucking heart.
survived all this shit
Exactly.
and you get like you want to talk about brilliant writing.
Yeah.
Like you survive a zombie apocalypse and die from a blood drop hitting you in the eye. You know what I mean? Like, oh man, it's like rain on your wedding day, man.
And that's such a great scene, because then that feeling carries you into the last sequence of the movie in the army base or whatever, which is so different in a lot of ways from the earlier movie, but that heartbreak really makes that transition work in a way that it almost doesn't, but it really does.
So we always end this, my friend, with the same question. We talked about what you're up to. We talked about your first horror movie and your favorite horror movie. But now we're going to go back to Final Destination, and we're going to rank this on a skull count. 0 being the worst and 5 being the best. Now, Reed, we are not ranking this on production, directing, quality, sound. We're not being critics here. We're ranking this movie strictly on how it affected you and what this movie means to you. So 0 skulls being the worst and 5 being the best. You can use half and quarter skulls. What would your ranking of Final Destination be?
That's a good question. About 3.5.
That's fair.
It was very influential at the time, and certainly the feeling of watching it stuck with me. And I'll never forget anything about that movie. And every time I watch it, it will take me back to being a kid in the theater. But I think I got a little more into the more textured horror movies later.
Sure.
Which I would count 28 Days Later in that really, where the characters are really what's driving the story in a way that I love Final Destination, but it is, and not but, and part of why I love it is because it is the epitome of late 90s or I don't know when it came out. It's the epitome of cheese from that era in a great way.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is not a slight at all, but it's so much of its time. The first one in particular just feel like they got the big brick cell phones, and it feels
it's authentic as shit, man.
Exactly, yeah. And it really feels of that time, but part of that it has sort of I watch it with a little more remove now when I see it.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of those movies that I think is, even though it's very loved in the horror community, I still feel it's an underrated film because
totally
it's very loved and appreciated in the horror community, but to people that aren't big fans of the horror genre, they don't even give it a second glance because it's just a movie full of kills and whatever. But it's such a deep movie. Like it's such a deep, and it works, like you said, on so many different levels. And again, it's a movie I enjoy very much. So Reed, I appreciate you coming on and doing this, man. This has been so much fun. Everybody remember.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been fantastic.
Dude, anytime, man. I'd love to have you back again. We do a couple other segments. I'd love to work with you again.
Sure.
Everybody, make sure you're clicking the links down here in the description because you are going to want to check out Bloodborne. Like I said, it's something that's going to keep you on the edge of your seat. And if you tell me that you saw what happened at the end coming, I will look you in your face and call you a liar. So, Reed, thank you so much for joining us. Don't go anywhere, man. I got a couple more questions for you.
All right.
Everybody else, thank you so much for watching. Keep talking horror. Stay what you are. And we'll see you guys soon.